Judy, I'm wondering if you might just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, at this point, I'm a 78-year-old wife, mother, grandmother, and I was 51 when I was diagnosed with CML.
Wow. So I noticed that even in just your basic introduction, you wanted to make sure that I knew about your experience with cancer. So why don't we go back? That was now, more than 20 years ago. So why don't we go all the way back to maybe before you were even diagnosed and tell us a little bit about what your life looked like then, before you got the diagnosis.
Well, I was married and had a daughter and a son, no grandchildren yet. I have a master's in education, and I was working in the school district as a glorified secretary for the visually impaired program, and enjoying that.
Wonderful. And what did you like to do for fun with your free time?
We like to travel. We'd go to Mexico for a couple weeks every year. We'd go to Central Oregon, and we had moved to California, so we would come back up to Portland, where we live now, because our families were both here in Portland.
And
so
where were you living in California?
In the Bay Area, out in the Walnut Creek area.
Fantastic. I'm from Southern California, so I always my ears always perk up when I hear California. And tell me about when you first noticed or first were told that something wasn't quite right.
Nobody told me that. My grandmother died of CML in 1979. My mother was diagnosed with CLL in 1991. And in 1995, I was going in for a physical. And in the back of my mind, I said, I ought to be thinking about wondering whether I perhaps would have any of this. And so I had asked the doctor to do a blood test. And she said, oh, no, you're not scheduled for a blood test. And I said, yes, I want a blood test done. So I got a call later that day saying, Judy, I made an appointment for you for tomorrow with a specialist. And I said, I'm sorry, but I'm going to be busy tomorrow. I can't. She says, no, nothing is more important than this. And what had happened was that my blood test came back showing I had 5% blasts in my drawn blood, the peripheral blood. And she thought I was in blast crisis or accelerating into that, and with CML. So she called this other doctor up and said, I want this patient tested tomorrow, bone marrow biopsy tomorrow. And I went in the next day with my husband and had the test done. And the doctor said to me, this is not normally what I do. I normally wait a couple weeks. But she says, your doctor was very insistent. And so she did the biopsy and said, yes, you have CML, but you're in chronic phase. You have those blasts out there. Don't know why you have so many out there, but in your own marrow, you're still at only 5%. So you're in the chronic phase.
And when you heard about this from your primary doctor and then the specialist, I know that you said your grandmother had CML. What did you know about it at the time?
That you had about a 3 to 5 year life expectancy. And so that was, my doctor told me that it was CML, but I had to have the proof from the marrow. I called my husband, I called my daughter, and I called our son, and our son says, oh, Mom, something will come along. You'll be just fine. Well, that was not a very nice thing to say. I mean, yes, he was encouraging me, but I wanted a little more sympathy. I wanted a little more, maybe I'm not going to be. And I got that, of course, from my daughter, and my husband says, no, you can't have this. I'm the one that should go first. And so that was their reactions to all of this.
Wow, those sound like some really charged conversations.
Yes. And how did I feel? I had tingles all the way up the arms. And I remember a couple days later going to a women's retreat planning meeting. And on the way over, I started crying. And I got myself under control and went to the meeting and then sat there and cried again. It's very emotional. It's really sometimes a really hard experience. It's kind of the fight or flight, I think.
Did you remember what it was like when your grandmother had gotten sick?
Um, a little bit. I knew she had the high blood counts. I knew that she and my grandfather went to visit a missionary friend in China, and they were on a boat. It was a horrible experience. I made an appointment for her to see her doctor when she got back, and he had put her on chemo, and that was a horrible experience for her. I mean, it was different then. And then finally she decided to go off of it, and they told her she would have 3 days to live, that her counts would go up so high that she'd just have an aneurysm.
Wow.
So yes, that was the experience. The only
You
experience
mentioned
I had.
that chemo was really horrible for her and really difficult. I know it was a long time ago. Do you recall what was so difficult about it for her?
Well, had to stay at the hospital. She was in a hospital bed. She kind of hallucinated. She thought somebody brought her flowers and she thought they were horrible things and get them out of there, and smells, and she could hear people talking and laughing, but not really knowing what was going on. She was just kind of in a surreal world, but everything affected her in a bad way.
Wow. And it sounds like she made the decision to stop treatment at a certain point.
She did.
When you heard about your own news, were you thinking at all about your grandmother, or otherwise just really focused on what was going on with you?
I was sort of focused on the 3 to 5 years. Also thinking that when it quit, what it might be like because of what happened with her. But
I think that's really understandable.
drugs had
And
changed at that time. And now instead of the chemo, they were doing interferon.
when you, if you can recall to sort of when you were first um, undergoing workup, you mentioned that you had a bone marrow biopsy right away. What was that like?
Well, what I did was I called a friend who is a medical technologist, and I said, would you lead me through what they do for a bone marrow biopsy? Because nobody told me the process. So I wanted to
Really?
know. Yes, they just said you're going to have one. So she explained the whole process of numbing the area, then going in through the bone, about the draw. The draw is about 5 to 6 seconds, and that's the painful part. You just take deep breaths for that, and then it's over. So she took the mystique away from it for me.
I'm really glad you had her in your corner to give you more information. It sounds like maybe you were not given a lot of information about what was going to happen.
I think that probably happens a bit, that the doctors forget that the patients don't know what's going on. And my friend was very much in my corner all the way along, explaining all the blood tests results, why some cells came out looking kind of teardrop shaped, why this, why that, why something was high, something was low. She explained all this to me, and so that was really helpful too.
I can only imagine. How else did you get information about what was going on with you, or what your tests meant, or what CML was?
The Leukemia and Lymphoma Society had booklets about it. But I went to a general cancer support group for a while and was in a group. I was the only one with CML. The others had a variety of different cancers. And one day I walked out of there and I said, I have to leave. And I never went back because I couldn't take everybody else's diseases. The whole thing was too much for me when I was dealing with my own. I had by that time found out that the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society had a support group just for leukemia and lymphoma people.
Mhm.
And so I went to that and met other people with the same disease. And that was very helpful because that's where I got really a lot more information.
Can you recall with when you were first meeting your specialist, probably your hematologist, what that relationship was like in terms of, did you feel that you could ask questions? Did you feel that things were being explained to you?
Um, yes, actually, she was very, very good. So was my primary care physician, actually. I gave her a certificate for a pound of See's chocolate when she rushed everything through for me because
As a Californian, I can appreciate how wonderful that is.
and so, you know, in both cases, both doctors were very good.
I'm going to dig a tiny bit more, Judy. When you sat down to speak with your hematologist during your regular visits about what was going on, tell me a little bit about sort of the ways that you interacted and what a visit might go like.
Boy, that was in 1995. That was a long time ago. Uh, she was actually very good. She'd been a medical technologist herself,
Really?
and she did made her own slides, did her own stuff because she knew she did the better job than anybody else could do. So she had that attitude, but she was very, very good. Um, she and I talked about the disease. She gave me information herself. Um, and she was very encouraging when she gave me the prescription for the interferon. And to begin with, it was the first part of December, 95. And we were coming up to Portland for Christmas. And she said, you can wait to take this drug till after Christmas because it might make you feel a little uncomfortable. Of course, I wasn't quite sure about that. So when I came up, I saw my mother's oncologist who said, yes, your doctor's right. You're fine. You don't have to start right away. But I wanted a second opinion and I got that. Anyway, so the doctor said to me, I'm going to start you out on 3 million units a day. And you go 3 days and then you'll increase it to 6 million units. And then we'll move it up to 9. She says, that way you'll be able to tolerate it. And so she was very positive on my being able to do this. Well, I got to the end of the 6th day and I called, I didn't get a hold of her, but I called and left a message and I said, I don't think I'm quite ready to go to the 9 million yet. Can I wait another day? Well, I didn't get a result back, but I waited another day and then went to 9. I had a friend from my support group who had a different doctor who said, this is going to be really rough for you. It'll be terrible, and was very negative about the results. I mean, how they feel on it. And she could never make it past about 4 million units.
Wow.
I made it to the 9 because my doctor told me I could do it and we'd work up to it. And I think that positiveness was really good.
That's really important to hear about. When you and your doctor made the decision to start interferon, tell me a little bit about how you made that decision and what your role was in making that decision.
I don't think I had any decision to make. I was simply told I was going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
What I did do was to say that I wanted to give it to myself. And so she said I could. I had 2 neighbors. One was a young gal who was a nurse and the other neighbor who was a nurse too. And the younger one came over and explained to me how to fill the needle, how to tap it off so that I get air bubbles out of it. And she watched while I injected myself. And both of them said to me, if you need any help, we'll come over and do it. But, that was what I needed was somebody to show me how to do it. So I was very fortunate.
Well, it also sounds like you took things into your own hands.
I did.
Has that always been your style, Judy?
Yes.
I can imagine. When you began with the interferon, what did your doctor tell you that you might expect in terms of how likely it would be to help you?
I don't think they knew a lot then. I think the most was that it would keep it under control.
And how did you feel about starting a new treatment?
Well, the way I didn't, it was that or nothing. But I did go, we went off, my husband graduated in Stanford. We went over to Stanford Medical and talked to them about having a bone marrow transplant
Mm-hmm.
as an option. And sat there and listened to him talk about the fact of what I would go through for the year. It didn't sound very pleasant. And the fact that by the end of the year, I probably had about a 50% chance of surviving. So we walked out of there, talked about it, and said, I'd rather spend the year feeling okay than to go through all that and 50% chance of dying from the treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I chose not to do anything other than the interferon.
You mentioned that you got a second opinion with your mom's oncologist. Could you tell me a bit about that?
Well, that was just to see at that Christmas time whether I really was right in delaying the treatment.
Understood. Was it something that your main hematologist was aware of?
That I'd gone? No, because we were up in Portland.
I understand. Okay. So you start the interferon and you make it up to 9 million units. And then what happens?
I stayed on that dose from actually January of 96 until, June of 98. They did another biopsy and said that things were progressing and they probably had about 6 to 9 months left before, it would just take over, and maybe they could keep me alive for a year with massive chemo.
Wow.
I called Fred Hutch at that point, the Hutchinson, and asked them about a bone marrow biopsy, a bone marrow transplant. And they said, having been on the interferon for 2.5 years, I had a 5% chance of surviving.
Wow. And they told this to you over the telephone?
Yes.
What was that like?
It's like, oh, I didn't realize at the time that the interferon had gone in and disturbed the marrow, and it destroyed some of the marrow. And that was why I wouldn't be as likely to survive. But it was, face each day as it comes.
When you got the bad news that it looked like the cancer was progressing despite being on the interferon, how did you get that news? Do you recall?
Yes, they simply called and told me.
And were you alone or were there other family members around?
I don't remember that.
Do you remember after later that day or that week after you got the news? I imagine that must have been jarring.
It was, but I had a little but there, and that was that Dr. Drucker from OHSU had already been studying from the Petri dish to on up on a new drug for CML. And my good friend, who is the medical technologist, had read about it or heard it on the radio. I can't remember which, but and she called me and she called Dr. Drucker's office and said, I think the two of you need to get together, And so he actually called me and asked me if I was interested in possibly being in a phase 1 trial. Yeah, I said yes. I was very interested. And actually this was prior to June. It was back in 96 that he was starting to do this. And he said he'd put me on. So this was, I had to go way back. he'd put me on a list. And as it got closer, he'd let me know. Well, they didn't start the human trials until 98. 98's when I found out that the interferon wasn't working. And so in the background, I had Dr. Drucker's drug, which they were just beginning to do. So I really had an overlap already of another possibility.
So because of your medical technician friend, you had been aware of his work for some time.
Yeah, and actually for almost 2 years.
And had you read about it yourself anywhere?
No.
No. What did you know about what clinical trials entailed and what they were when you first spoke to him?
That phase 1 trial was to find toxicity level.
Mhm.
Phase 2 was to see if it showed signs of working. And phase 3 was a continuation. Normally trials were a placebo for phase 1 and then on. So that was all I knew about. But I had gotten a couple of notes from him saying how they were progressing. So I knew that. So when 98 came along and this other was failing, I talked to my doctor and she said, well, are you sure you want to go into a phase 1 trial? I'd really rather you went to phase 2 because phase 1 is just for seeing if it works. Well, it turns out that for this trial, Dr. Drucker was only testing CML patients and we didn't have placebos. It was just the drug was there. And I said, my husband actually said, Judy, you're going to do this now. It's here. You're on the list. You're going into the phase 1.
Wow.
And
How
so
did you feel when he said that?
Well, that was that it was enough to convince me too. I wanted to do that. So we made arrangements to come and visit with Dr. Drucker. And after sitting there with him, and he said, if this doesn't work, we will do everything we can to keep you safe, to do whatever else to try to set you up with something to help you out, because it would really look bad to have you die on the study. And he kind of, I love that. He was marvelous. He still is marvelous. But that was just enough to say, yeah, I trust this guy. And I want to try his drug.
What did the rest of your family think?
They were all in favor of going ahead with it.
And what did you know about how the drug worked, or how much detail were you privy to?
I didn't know anything about the drug.
That's okay. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, except that they had started out with, the 25 and the 50, and they were working their way up. So I knew that. When I did get on, I was at 250 milligrams. So, but thinking what we did between June and November was we decided we would take a family memory trip. And I wanted the family all to think, of the good time we'd done something together. And we'd always talked about going to New Zealand someday when we retired. And so we took our two kids who were adults, not single, and we took them to New Zealand. Well, I was miserable that I got 2 seats so I'd have one to lay down on. And we went, I seen Dr. Drucker. I saw my own doctor. Dr. Drucker provided me with a prescription for a drug because my platelets, to keep that under control.
And you had already started the trial at this point? No, you had not. Okay.
But between the two of them, my platelets were high and they wanted to know, I had to go off of the interferon, had to be off of it for 3 months. So I was given this anagrelide and I was told to get a couple of tests in New Zealand to see where I was to determine whether to raise or lower the drug I was taking. And both doctors, because the platelets were high, my doctor, when I went back down to California, my doctor arranged for me to have my platelets spun off. So I had pheresis because they were so high. And it was arranged that the next morning before we got on the plane, I would have pheresis again if I needed it. So they did another test. So they were See, I've been really fortunate. I had doctors who really worked hard for me. And I didn't need it then. I went to New Zealand. I had 2 blood tests done there.
How did you find a doctor to have a blood test with in New Zealand?
There was a clinic, and I just walked into the clinic and said, I have this, prescription for a blood test. And it said to the doctor, please give her the information that she needs afterwards. And so the first one in Rotorua said, oh, you look like you're a, Kiwi, so there's no charge on this. And he says, I gather from your doctor says that you know what to do with the results. And so he told me. Then we were down in Christchurch, and I went to it was Dunedin, and I went to another doctor's clinic down there, and it was a Saturday, and it was almost noon. Well, the lab was in another up the street. The guy came down and picked me up, took me back to the lab. A woman waited there at the lab, even though they were ready to have been closed, and they did the test and gave me the results. It was fabulous. I mean, they were super.
How were you feeling on your New Zealand trip?
I began feeling better every day. So I was pretty good by the time we came home.
You said you were feeling a little lousy when you left.
Yes, I still had the interferon in my system.
What didn't feel good?
It's like you have the flu, the not sick to your stomach flu, but the other flu, and just weak, tired, yucky.
And how long were you in New Zealand for?
2 weeks.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so you're feeling better, and you come back from New Zealand with your blood work in order. And then what happened?
We had to be up here, up in Portland, first part of January. I started the tests on January 9th, I think it was. So our daughter was in Salem, going to university there, and she found us a place down by the river, and we could see out, and it was really nice. And we had to be here for 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
So
was your husband working at the time?
Yes, but he was able to he transferred, well, his company had put him on a project here in Portland.
How good. Okay. And had you taken a leave from your work?
I had been fired from my job.
I see.
I had been fired. I had been let go because I had cancer, and they told me I should stay home and take care of myself.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. It happens.
What did you feel like when that happened?
It was awful. I had a note in the spring saying, we'll see you back in September. I walked into the school in September, and they said, you're not supposed to be here. You're not with us anymore, and you better call the district office.
Had you told them about your cancer diagnosis?
I did about 1.5 years afterwards.
After
I had been diagnosed.
Okay. And so you had continued working for a period of time after you were diagnosed?
Before I told them.
Before that you told them. And I'm just wondering what prompted you to tell them?
I think probably because I wasn't feeling real well. I mean, I was functioning, and the job I had to do was, was fine. But anyway, so that was a horrible experience.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Did you have any inkling of doing something about it, or was it at the time simply something that
I had a lawyer,
Mhm.
and that was only sort of so good. They did cover my 18 months of COBRA.
Okay. Wow. I think that's a really important story for people to hear.
Yeah, I did get another job, and I was a receptionist then, and in a medical for Kaiser, actually.
Mhm.
And I walked to work. I'd walk to the high school too. This was just beyond that. And instead of working 25 hours a week, which I had been doing, which was all that was, for that job. I was working up to 40 hours a week. Well, if I could handle 40, I should have been able to handle the 25.
Certainly. And did you choose to tell Kaiser about your diagnosis?
Well, they were also my healthcare provider.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes it a little bit tricky, doesn't it?
But they didn't have a problem with it.
I'm glad to hear that. So sorry, thank you for going back and telling me that story. I think we got to, your daughter had found a place for you and your husband to near the river in Oregon, and your husband had gotten a work transfer to be on a project up in Portland.
Right. And so we had to be up, I had to come up every day to OHSU. And there were a group of us. At that point, I was number 9 from OHSU on the study.
Mhm.
And met some really neat people. And I'm still in contact with one of the gals, and she's been stayed at my home and I stayed at her home, and we get together every summer. And
Wow.
when I go over towards, where she lives in Central Oregon, and we have meal together. And so
And how did you meet?
we met because we were sitting there together waiting for our appointments or our blood tests.
Understood. And is that the way you met other people who were participating in the trial?
Yes, met a lot of them that way. And then a group of us decided that before people left in the summer, we ended up staying longer than the 3 months. My husband's mother wasn't doing very well, and so we extended our stay. So I met a lot of different people. And by the time summer came around, we had a gathering at the apartment complex where we were living, and the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society came over, and we said, we'd like to have a support group, but we don't want to belong to the one that you already have organized, because we're all doing extremely well on this drug. And we think we're just too positive, too good, and healthy, and it might not be good for the other people in the other support group. So they said, sure, we'll help to start one. So I kind of was spearheaded that and ran that one. And we did a newsletter. We met once a month. Dr. Drucker would come to the meeting. He would explain to us why he wanted the counts to drop down. And then, get started on the drug. He explained the whole process, what they were looking for, what they hoped to see. He had people come and show us sample slides of what our bone marrow looked like, which cells were bad ones, which were the good cells. We had people do mind meditation. We had somebody come and talk about pharmacology and what drugs should go with and what drugs we shouldn't take, talking about herbs and which ones were bad and what to look for in them. And it was a real educational time. And he did that. And then whatever the main subject was, I'd write it up, and we interviewed people, and they talked about what they were doing. We never used more than the first name. And the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society printed these all up. And then a group of us would sit up there at OHSU and stuff envelopes and put stamps and lick them shut and mailed them out too.
Judy, this is absolutely marvelous. And I'm wondering if you still have copies of any of these newsletters.
I do. Probably have 21 or so of those.
Wow.
One of the gals put together stories from all of us and presented Dr. Drucker with a thank you book, and
Wow.
for that. And it was a wonderful experience to have this trial be incorporating all of us, the whole person. It wasn't just getting and the Gleevec is a pill, so no more shots. So that was really nice. But you need to take it with food.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise you couldn't keep it down.
How did it make you feel, the pill?
Oh, we said that the Gleevec was user-friendly. All of us had been on interferon. So the Gleevec was just to us nothing. Just the only thing we seemed to do, the Gleevec had destroyed our appetite. And we would take the Gleevec and we had this little thing. Oh, and you take the Gleevec, you take a little Hershey Kisses with it. You know, it all sits better. Well, some people gained a fair amount of weight on their little Hershey Kisses. They didn't stop at one. No, our appetites increased. So we felt really good.
So the Gleevec, you had said the Gleevec decreased your appetite. Do you
No,
mean
the interferon had decreased.
interferon? That's what I thought you were.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm
Understood.
sorry. Yeah.
No, I follow you. When did you first have an inkling that this pill was helping you?
They did with the first blood test. It showed that the blood, it had dropped down. We had, I think I've had 23, 25 bone marrow biopsies. We had to have them fairly regularly.
Mhm.
I got a cytogenetic response, which means there was actually a decrease in the Philadelphia chromosome. And up to that point, you know, my first oncologist said, I'd said to her one time, well, what percentage do I have of that? She said, well, you have it. You either have it or you don't have it. They have learned so much in the time that there was actually a percentage that you could have of the CML.
Absolutely.
And then from there, they learned all kinds of other things that they had never known before that were going on.
How did you stay up to date with all of this growing knowledge?
Well, the once a month meetings with Dr. Drucker, he kept us all informed what was going on in the whole process.
And is that how you found out that other people on the trial were also benefiting from the medicine?
Yeah, all of us, well, this once a month meeting that we had, people would try to plan. Those who were there for 3 months, of course, were always there. Those who had to come back and be checked every 3 months tried to arrange that they were always there for his meeting. So we would have probably 30 people or more sitting around a table while he was talking. He'd eat his lunch while we were meeting.
And where did you meet?
We met in a conference room up at OHSU.
Wow. And as news of this drug began to, I'm sure, spread around, do you recall hearing about it in any sort of ways that were external to Dr. Drucker or your group at OHSU?
Yes, there were early CML support groups were not really support group. They were people chatting with each other and you didn't get anything. But it began to grow and some of these people were on and they let the cat out of the bag and said what was going on, which was good, except that you can only have a certain number of people on a trial. You know, it was done here, it was done at the Joslin Cancer Center at UCLA, and it was done at MD Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
So we had 3 centers that were doing it. They all did it in their own way. OHSU with Dr. Drucker was the only one who had the groups of people, support groups that would sit around and visit and hear about it from him.
It sounds like you were doing a lot of interpersonal, in-person communication.
Yes, that's my way.
Understood completely. And so once this started to work, tell me what happened next.
It was like, wow, you know, and the 3 to 5 years was kind of like, oh, we don't have necessarily an end anymore. What it was is that we were told we could die, we could get any other disease. You have to remember you're still, you know, prone to any different thing, but we're probably not going to die of the CML.
Wow.
So.
How did you break that news to your family?
Oh, well, they were there all the way along, so they knew what was going on.
So at any point, did you worry that the medicine might stop working at some point?
No, I don't think so. Don't remember that. I'm still on it.
I know. That's really remarkable. And now you've been on it for a really long time. And tell me what you've done in that time, in all those years, and how you've.
Well, I have welcomed 2 grandchildren. Our grandson just graduated from high school in March, got through early. As I was telling somebody this morning, the COVID made it such that, people were really pretty confined places. Our granddaughter had just gotten her permit. I attend church, but church was online. So I said, Sunday mornings are a good morning to not very many people out driving. Let's go driving. So I had the great experience of going out and riding with my granddaughter as she learned to drive. We started in a little neighborhood. We branched a little bit farther. We did this, we did that. Our final thing was she drove me to the beach, which was 80 some miles from Portland.
Wow.
And then back again. And that was her graduation thing. And, we did trips part way. We got halfway there once and then back, and, we'd plan places to stop and visit along the way. And she knew where every Taco Bell place was. And we always had to stop.
I love it.
And it was fun. That was a wonderful, wonderful experience. COVID has been bad, but it gave us the opportunity just to do this.
How, if it at all, did COVID affect your healthcare?
I don't think it did at all. When, the boosters came along, or the shots came along, I, of course, got them and felt much relieved. When the boosters came along, it was decided that I should not have the booster. I should have a full dose again.
Mm-hmm.
So I did. I am now scheduled tomorrow for the 4th dose, which will just be a booster.
And did you continue seeing your doctors during the worst parts of the pandemic?
No, I had to go back to my own care provider, and we had phone visits, but that was all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you still see Dr. Drucker?
I just saw him this morning, but I don't see him as a doctor. Right.
Tell me more.
Well, he's wonderful. I just really enjoy him, and he seems to think that I'm okay. I was the first one of his patients to get this cytogenetic response, and one of the early patients. All of his patients are special to him, and he remembers everybody, and he knows about their, remembers about their family and what's going on. Just a unique individual. So anytime I get a chance, I say hello. And I came up here to OHSU to do this interview because the lighting, I figured they would set up and would be better than what I might have at home.
I'm very glad it worked out.
It did.
Well, I have had an opportunity to ask you so many questions, Judy, and I'm wondering if there's anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like people to know about your experience.
I think perhaps one of the most important things is being positive, not in a positive and a negative way. But I do think that people's attitude and their approach to their cancer and their treatment is really important. I know that my daughter had a blood clot and she had to use the medicine for that. And all she could think of was rat poison till she had somebody explain to her what it was really doing and how it was, look at it in a positive way instead. And she said it was so much easier for her to do it when she had a positive attitude about what she was doing than a negative one. So I think that that's important, is anybody who's diagnosed with it is to be looking, do your research. And a lot of times you can't, personally. So you get somebody you can trust, somebody you know to get the information for you. To have somebody to go with you to the doctor because you don't always hear. You hear what you want to hear or don't want to hear, but you have somebody else with you and write your questions down ahead of time. One of the positive things for me when I was first diagnosed, was I was given a buddy box to look through and pick out a name of somebody who had CML.
Mm.
And I called that person. And what she had told me was basically, I'm 5 years out. That I don't remember anything else, but that she was alive still at 5 years. So that was a real positive thing.
Was that somebody that you met once you were on the trial or before?
No, this was back when I was first diagnosed, and it was this first support group. They had this box, and it was just somebody who said they'd be willing to talk to somebody else.
Did you ever become a name in the buddy box?
Not in that one, but I was for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, and I talked to people all the way across the country who were just newly diagnosed and who were going on, the drugs. So
What was that like?
that was really kind of neat. I've had one person that's called me every year to say, "Hi, I'm here. You there?" Yes. I didn't hear from him this year, but it could be he lost my phone number or something. I need to look up his, to call him, but yeah, but a lot of us kept in contact. It was just, I think that I tried to get to them is I'm still here. I think that was the important thing to know.
Well, I'm so deeply appreciative of this really remarkable conversation and of your willingness to talk about your own experiences with us today, Judy.